Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and this is Dinner at Barney's. Yeah, all right, have fun, guys. Okay, so picking up where we left off, connecting Stockton, California and Baltimore via guaranteed income programs and then connecting them through the Reeds makes complete sense to me now because whether it's guaranteed income or tableau fundraisers, like the thank you, like the one the ladies threw for the Home of the Friendless in late April 1870. Either way, it's charity, and there are few who can challenge Emily Reed née McKim for the title of most charitable person ever, right? And that charity plays an intimate role in her spellcraft, right? Her and her witches, whose coven of Diana worshippers is so strong it uses the Baltimore Basilica as a beard, right? None of this is coincidence, right? Charity is, or was anyway, a staple ingredient in the spellcraft of religion. And when the powers that be decided government was the new religion, they brought charity with them. Because the state will take care of you now, right? And all this charity, at least in Baltimore, wouldn't be possible without the likes of Emily Reed née McKim and her family. And so Falcon's Maze for Emily, and for the McKims for that matter, starts with the fact that I'd come across the McKim name in the past, but I'd always stuck it in my back pocket because I knew they were going to be part of a major story I wasn't ready for. A story for me that started with finding a John McKim on the first board of directors for the B&O Railroad, back at the very beginning of my research, right? And again, I have to say, I so loosely consider this research, right? But I had this guy among the first board of directors of the B&O Railroad. And I also had a building called McKim's School, right? And McKim's School was the second building that Mary took me to see on our first trip out over 3 years ago now, right? And there's going to be a lot more about McKim's School later. But briefly, it was the first free public elementary school that opened in Baltimore in 1821, and it was the model school for all the free public schools in Baltimore that followed for the next 50 years, right? And it was founded by one John McKim that school literature refers to as Quaker John. And so now 3+ years ago, I just assumed that they were the same guy, right? Because the timeline fit. The first board of directors for the B&O would have been like 1826 or something like that, right? And so if the school opened in 1821, I just kind of figured they're the same guy. But in the back pocket, this information stayed. But then when I first read the name Emily McKim, I think my first thought was, I wondered if Emily was related to this John McKim. And so spoiler alert, she is, right? I mean, she's his granddaughter. But as I was saying, the McKims don't give up their secrets so easily, even when it appears that they are, right? And so from Emily's obituary, right, it says here that she's born May 10th, 1840 to David Telfair McKim and Sarah Beatty. Great! So look up David Telfair McKim on my Trusted Genie page, right? And sure enough, he's the son of John McKim Jr., my railroad executive, right? Here he is, father of David Telfair McKim, making him Emily's grandfather, right? Easy peasy. But not so fast, right? Because why aren't Emily and her mother, Sarah Beatty, on David Telfair McKim's Genie page? They're just not here. They list him as husband to one Mary Malvina McKim, right? No Sarah Beatty, no Emily McKim. So this seemed really strange to me, right? So I had to dig a little deeper on David Telfair McKim, and I found him on this family's genealogy page. This is the JHBL family genealogy page, right? And they have a listing for him here. But wouldn't you know it? There's no mention of Emily or her mother here either. How could this be, right? Because, I don't understand because I did finally find them on Ancestry.com. And so apparently this David Telfair McKim was married twice and had 2 different families, right? His first wife was this Mary Malvina Hawkins, and they have 3 children together, right? But unfortunately she dies at the tender young age of 33, right? And leaving David Telfair McKim as a very eligible widower at the age of 39 or something like this. Right? And so right, he then marries this Sarah Beatty and goes on to have 4 children with her, right? Including our Emily McKim and John McKim. And it's this John, Emily's brother, who goes on to be involved in all those productions of the Maryland and Wednesday clubs, right? But I have to wonder if there's some sort of feud between the Beatty McKims and the Hawkins McKims. And maybe that's why the Beatty McKims are not on David Telfair McKim's Genie page or this JHBL family genealogy page. And I find this very interesting. There has to be some form of reason they're not included because the McKims, and especially Emily, are so proud of their heritage and genealogy. I would think that would be important to them, and so it just seems like such a strange omission. And stranger still once we learn who JHBL is, right? Because JHBL is John Hazelhurst Bonneville Latrobe, American lawyer and inventor, and so much more. And he could be a major cog in the Mrs. Jarley Waxworks wheel. I haven't talked about this, but it's the Latrobe name that drew my interest in this story and made me want to read more about it. Right, so there's going to be a lot more on the Latrobes down the line. And so it's very, very interesting that the Latrobes and the McKims are related. If for no other reason than there seems to be some confusion as to where David Telfair McKim's father, John McKim Jr., the railroad executive, is from, right? And so you can see that his Genie page here doesn't have an opinion on the matter of where John McKim Jr. is from. But his Wikipedia page tells us that he's from Baltimore, Maryland, right? Born March 28, 1766 in Baltimore, right? And this is backed up by the JHBL family page. Born March 28, 1766, Baltimore Independent Cities. Yet over on Ancestry, they have his birthplace as none other than Londonderry, Ulster. Are you kidding me? Right? And this is corroborated by Emily McKim's obituary. Hey, where is it? Right? John McKim, born March 28, 1766, came from Londonderry, Ireland to Baltimore in 1780, or when he was around 14 years old. Making his success story also all the more interesting. Did his family, when he came over at 14, did he come over with a wealthy family? Did he have a benefactor here? Did he earn his way up? There's a lot to learn about John McKim Jr. yet. And so I can understand Wikipedia being wrong, right? Because it's wiki and it's user generated. But the JHBL genealogy page? Why would they misrepresent this? Surely they knew where he was from, right? How could they not? Right? So Mud City sees this as a deliberate attempt to cover Johnny's tracks, right? Because in Mud City, we understand the importance of Londonderry. How important it could, thank you, how important it could be to what's going on in America and the world today. And its involvement in the story of the hidden hand and the crown's planting of Ulster and then America. So I think it's time to take a closer look at Emily's grandfather, John McKim, don't you? Right, now that we know that he's from Londonderry, right? And the gatekeepers are largely silent on him. There are references to his involvement with the railroad companies and stuff, but there really isn't a whole lot to find, on the surface, right? And even his wiki page is rather sparsely written as far as these things go, right? And so for his personal life, it just says that he marries Margaret Telfair on July 11th, right? And that the couple had at least one child. Now, the amazing thing about this is that on his Genie page, why does the wiki page say at least one when this Genie page has 5 children? Were some of these children contested? I don't understand. Is it just laziness on the writer of this wiki page? And to add to the confusion, they only talk about Mary Melvina Hawkins. No Sarah Beatty here. And then in the very next paragraph, they talk about a granddaughter, Emily McKim Reed, who is Sarah Beatty's daughter, not Mary Melvina's. So what is going on here? There's deliberate, this stuff can't be an accident, right? This has to be on purpose. There's just something not right about how misdirecting the McKim family branch of the puzzle tree can be. Right? And there's going to be more of that down the line. But I want to continue on with what the gatekeepers in Wikipedia want us to know about John McKim Jr. Right? This is unbelievable. And so Wikipedia is largely silent on exactly what type of merchant he was or how he came to be one of the state-appointed members of the B&O Railroad. Right? But being a rail baron suited him, and he was director of the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore railroads as well, the main line of which is still in use today as part of Amtrak's Northeast Corridor. But the most interesting thing that Wiki tells us is what happened on February 28th, 1814. And that's when John McKim and 7 other gentlemen hosted a dinner for General William H. Winder. Why the gatekeepers put this in there is anyone's guess, but it's very interesting because of who this General William H. Winder was. And so William H. Winder was an American soldier and Maryland lawyer who was promoted to general during the War of 1812. And even on the surface, this promotion is suspect for two reasons. The first is because he doesn't appear to be a very good commander, and the second is the district that he's put in charge of. All right, and so picking up his story during the War of 1812, he's in his late 30s already, and he's been practicing law in Baltimore. And from seemingly out of nowhere, he's commissioned as a full-bird colonel in the U.S. Army at the start of the War of 1812. And that's a high rank for someone I found no record of military service for. Right? And he has some early success and is promoted to brigadier general. But then disaster strikes. That's when he and his fellow commander John Chandler are captured during the Battle of Stony Creek. Right? Apparently these two military geniuses get turned around in the battle when John Chandler is injured. Right? And William H. Winder leads them directly into the British line, confusing it for their own. And now keep that in mind as we go forward. They confuse the British line for their own. And so needless to say, they're captured and held prisoner only to be freed some 6 months later in a prisoner exchange deal. And so Chandler slinks back to Massachusetts after this embarrassment, but Winder, he gets promoted. On July 4th, 1814, barely a year after being humiliatingly captured by the British, James Madison, 4th President of the United States, promotes him to commander of the new 10th Military District, which is responsible for the defense of Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. This guy? Really? Who's coming off a humiliating capture and whose greatest military feat to date appears to be not getting killed? How is he put in charge of protecting the nation's capital? It just doesn't seem to make sense, right? It just doesn't fit. How could there not have been more capable officers available for perhaps the most important job in the U.S. Army, right? But it starts to make a lot more sense filtered through the Mud City paradigm, right? Which has this war as a staged event. And so now this dinner that John McKim throws for this guy also starts to make a lot more sense too. And wouldn't you know it, it's a fundraiser, right? And there's an ad for it. It says, the dinner to General William H. Winder will be on the table this day at Barney's Fountain Inn at 4:30. Subscribers to this newspaper can procure their tickets at the bar. And so if Willie here was captured in July of 1813, and this fundraising dinner is on February 28th, 1814, that means he was released, no later than 6 months after his capture. But why does it take a committee of 8 men to throw this thing? What was really going on here? Is it really just a coincidence that not even 6 months after this dinner, and less than a year after being captured, he's put in charge of defending the nation's capital? Because once he's in charge, Washington falls at the Battle of Bladensburg. Called the greatest disgrace ever dealt to American arms, Washington is completely sacked. And so we've talked about this battle before, and the incompetence surrounding this battle it staggers belief. Right? And so Mud City really sees this battle as an inside job. That this battle and the raising of Washington, D.C. was a completely staged ritual event. Right? Because without this battle, the battle for Baltimore never takes place the way they say it allegedly did, right? Maybe we don't get a Star-Spangled Banner. Maybe Riggs and Peabody never meet. Or maybe an aging and bored patriot named David Poe doesn't get to come out of retirement for the thrill of one more battle. And I say all this, of course, because failure of this magnitude has to take planning, right? This type of debacle doesn't happen by accident. And I think the final arrangements were made February 28th, 1814, at Barney's. Our boy Winder here was the perfect patsy, a terrible yet loyal soldier whose uncle just so happened to be Levin Winder. And so Levin Winder was the 14th governor of Maryland. And not only that, at this time he was the newly elected most worshipful Grand Master of Masons in Maryland, who goes on to lay the cornerstone of Washington Monument in Mount Vernon, where we have 11s dancing all around this monument on our maps. And so I think it's safe to say that Willie Winder is juiced in, right? He's willing and he's going to be well rewarded. Though he's court-martialed for his role in the Bladensburg debacle, he is acquitted of all wrongdoing, and he resumes his life in Baltimore as a leading attorney at the Baltimore bar, right? But he then joins this influential literary social group called the Delphian Club. And so what the Delphian Club was, it was this super elite literary club that lasted for about 9 years. It was founded in 1816 and was pretty much done by 1825, but it counts among its founding members John Pierpont. And so John Pierpont is the grandfather of J.P. Morgan, which is kind of interesting. And so what this what this Delphian Club was. And it's interesting now to see the name William Sinclair jumping out at me. But what this Delphian Club was, what the members of this Delphian Club were, they were the arbiters of literature. They really did shape the literary culture of the day, all right? And so the thing about this is that they're the Delphian Club, right? And so they named themselves after the Oracle at Delphi, which is, of course, associated with Apollo, who's Diana's brother, right? So if we have all of this Diana worship going on here with Emily McKim and her coven of witches, right, at these tableau parties, then it makes complete sense that we're going to get the yin to that yang. We're going to get Apollo worship here too. And putting this one together, this is the first time I've ever seen Apollo's name rendered as Apollo Belvedere, which is really crazy considering the Belvedere connection with the Howards and Howard's Woods. You know, I never knew this before, and so that adds whole new levels to that as well. You know, this story just keeps getting better every time I go back in. Because not only is this Delphian Club named after the Oracle of Delphi, which is dedicated to Apollo, and not only are they the arbiters of literature, right? They actually claim, facetiously, of course, they claim that the group was founded in 1420 BC, and club records claim the president to be a representative of Apollo. Members were each associated with one of the muses. And so now think about that on top of this as well as the arbiters of literature. They must have felt very highly of themselves and really felt that they were doing the works of the gods. Did they look at the literature they promoted as works of divine intervention coming from prophetic sources? You know, I don't know, but it's certainly really an amazing aspect to add to this story. Again, and so I don't think it's a coincidence that William H. Winder winds up in the Delphian Club, which had a grand total of 16 members throughout its existence, only 9 of which could serve at a time, right? And Edgar Allan Poe lampoons the group in his unpublished Tales of the Folio Club from the 1830s. Good old Eddie. This is no more coincidence than his promotion after his dinner at Barney's. Because remember, the McKims are Frasers of Lovat, and they love themselves some treachery, right? So it wouldn't surprise me one bit if McKim and Winder here were involved in a plot to raise Washington, D.C. All right, so I'm going to close this one out here, though we're far from finished with the McKims. All right, so we'll pick it up next time with McKim's School and Quaker John, right? And so remember, guys, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies, right? And so until the next one, cheers.